What is up, denizens of the interwebs? It's Chats here, coming at you with another video, and this time it looks like Ubisoft is still continuing to have a really bad go as of late, and it is all, of course, their fault. As Prince of Persia was recently released on Steam a couple months ago, and a lot of data has come out about that, and it looks like the team has been officially disbanded. So like, subscribe, and let's get into it. Coming from John F. Trent over at That Park Place, rumor, Ubisoft disbanded Prince of Persia The Lost Crown development team. According to French YouTube channel Origami, who hosts detailed that at the Ubisoft Montpellier office, employees were seen transporting boxes of supplies from one floor to another, claiming that the reason was because Ubisoft has disbanded the Prince of Persia The Lost Crown development team, which is gathered through using rough translations of YouTube's translation function. He said that it was clear in the spring, in fact, a few patches of DLC and all were packing up. So there was a whole bunch of DLC and a sequel that was initially planned for Prince of Persia The Lost Crown that was all canned after the game's very mediocre launch. As Ubisoft's management had made the decision to move on from the game shortly after it was released, the host claimed that some members of the core development team fought for 2 DLCs in an attempt to change the minds of management. However, Ubisoft didn't give a shit because the sales were horrible, they were completely below expectations, and decided to relocate the team to potentially lucrative projects. They also refused to release the sequel because they believed that the sequel would cannibalize long-term sales of the game, which just shows a complete and utter misunderstanding of how the gaming market works. Here's the thing, Ubisoft, if you put out a really good sequel, people are going to go back and buy the first game and play it. You're not going to cannibalize the sales of the first game, you're only going to increase them. Because there have been times where I've seen a really awesome trailer for a game and it led me to go back and buy the initial game so that I could play that game first, even if that game was just on sale. But guess what? A sale that's on sale is still a sale. They did publicly announce that they were relocating the resources within the company back in May, moving people from the Division Heartland at Red Storm Entertainment and relocating them to resources to big opportunities such as X-Defiant and Rainbow Six. X-Defiant, by the way, which is doing really bad and is looking at it possibly being shut down if their next quarter isn't substantially better. Furthermore, the company announced that its strategic focus was to regain leadership in open-world adventures and expand footprint in games-as-service native experiences. So first of all, Ubisoft has never had a dominating leadership in open-world adventures. The closest they ever had were their early game Assassin's Creed games, when it comes to open-world, especially Assassin's Creed 3 and 4, or Black Flag, but guess what? Those weren't the dominated open-world games ever. Ubisoft has never been at the forefront of open world experiences, and they certainly were never the leadership in them. When Bethesda, of all things, is beating you in that experience, you're doing something wrong. And if it wasn't Bethesda, then it was CDPR, or it was Square Enix, or one of a million other game studios. So reassess where you are, because you clearly have an overinflated sense of importance. And as for expanding the footprint in games as services, you're going to look at a whole lot more people who are refusing to support you because everyone hates the live service model. There are some games, such as a lot of multiplayer games, where the live service model works because if you have a free-to-play game, then you're much more willing to drop money on DLC, skins, or other expansions. And because it's online, it makes sense that this game is a live service because of the fact that you need someone to run the server. Like Marvel Rivals is a live service game that I'm heavily looking forward to launching full force because it was super fun to play. But if you're planning on putting more single player games into games as services like Suicide Squad Kills the Justice League, you better be expecting a significantly larger drop off in your revenue stream. If your company lasts that long, that is. And in regards to the game sales, we don't have concrete numbers, but the biggest indicator we have is coming from back in August when the game was first launched on Steam. Since the game was launched initially in January on Epic Games Launcher. Its Steam peak highest it ever reached was 1,446 players in the past 24 hours, however, according to the time this article was written, they had only had a player count of 123. And yes, I know, it's a single-player Metroidvania, which means you only need about 30 hours to probably 100% the game. So I get it, the player count isn't going to be super big right now, but the point is the player count should be bigger than 123. Hollow Knight, an indie developer, Metroidvania, so the same genre, is sitting at 4,080 players right now with an all-time peak of 20,000. Grime, a several-year-old, really niche Metroidvania that was released for free on the Epic Games Launcher, is still sitting at 2,000 all-time peak and a 75 concurrent. The fact that it had a higher all-time peak and is having such a very close 24-hour peak is kind of concerning for this game. And then Blasphemous, another Metroidvania that's also an indie game that was also kind of more on the niche side, that has had a sequel come out that was fairly successful, had an all-time peak of 3,000 and a concurrent of 800. So I don't want to hear any of these kinds of claims. For instance, oh, you're using a bad number because the game's old. Of course the number is low. The numbers should not be lower than these indie games that are significantly older than Prince of Persia. This game came out in 2019. Grime came out in 2021. And Hollow Knight launched in 2017. So the fact that these games are all beating Prince of Persia is an indicator that the number is relevant as to how low these numbers are. These games should be comparable. Actually, no. Prince of Persia should not be comparable to these games because Prince of Persia should have significantly higher player count given how new it is. And sales estimates indicate that the game sold 54,000 units and at a minimum of 40,600 units, since we don't know the exact number. For perspective, Concord sold 20,800 units to 25,700 units. So this game only sold about twice as well as the biggest flop in gaming history. So combining the strikes, combining the delay of Assassin's Creed Shadows, combining the fact that they had to get rid of that statue and most of the pre-order content and bonus content they were going to be putting into Shadows, the fact that Star Wars Outlaws is flopping, and the fact that they have 700 employees currently on strike, it's not looking too good at Ubisoft. But it gets even better when you realize that in regards to the Prince of Persia's team's relocation, one of the head developers at Laryan Studios who worked on Baldur's Gate 3 came out to lambast Ubisoft for having the complete and utter wrong idea when it comes to game development. Coming over from PC Gamer, unfortunately, Baldur's Gate 3 publishing chief calls out Ubisoft's broken strategy. If gamers need to get used to not owning games, developers must get used to not having jobs. Written by Andy Chalk. With the byline, Prince of Persia: The Lost Throne was a critical hit but didn't sell very well, and Michael Dowse thinks that's entirely Ubisoft's fault. Wait, have I been saying the name of this game wrong this entire time? No, it looks like they got it wrong over at PC Gamer. That's hysterical. Well, thank you, PC Gamer, for giving me a bit of a crisis of faith. And this is all coming over from X, where Laryan Director of Publishing Michael Dowse decided to speak out about Ubisoft's various problems they've been having recently, particularly the decision to disband the Prince of Persia Lost Crown development team. Hold up, so they get the name right in the actual article, but they get it wrong in the byline? Get your shit together, Andy Chalk. Saying it's the result of a broken strategy that prioritizes subscriptions over sales, and he's 100% correct. According to PC Gamer, Prince of Persia: The Lost Crown is quite good, which is actually what I've heard, which is a shame, because I have the entire Prince of Persia collection. I remember playing one of them on the DSi a long time ago, and I do want to get into it, and I love me some Metroidvanias, especially some with a bit of style to them. But the fact that this game is $40 for base, $50 for max, I'm not buying this game until it goes down to at most $15. If not cheaper. Dowse feels is at least, and this whole thing is something that Dowse feels is at least partially the outcome of Ubisoft focus on subscriptions over conventional game sales. The whole feeling comfortable with not owning your own game, which is something an executive over at Ubisoft had made in relation to Assassin's Creed Shadows and various other titles, which is directly tied into the idea of subscriptions, as well as accompanying the decision to stop releasing games on Steam, which is far and away the biggest digital storefront for PC gaming, 1,000,000%. He continues on that The Crew, Mirage, and Avatar came in 2023 and didn't perform, so you can assume subscriptions were at a low when Prince of Persia released in 2024, which means people wouldn't be launching their store at all too much. And also, this is the same thing. Assassin's Creed Mirage did flop, and I actually did pick it up because it's currently 50% off, and I think $22 isn't a horrible price to pay for it. Though I did want some of the skins, I controlled myself, I didn't give Ubisoft the money, and I didn't buy any of the extra skins. And yeah, if you require subscription services, no one's going to buy your games. People don't buy games if they can rent them for $14 a month to get access to all of the games. These subscription models don't work. The closest one to being functional would only be Xbox's because of how available it is and the fact that it's usable on multiple platforms. If it had released on Steam, not only would it have been a market success, but there would likely be a sequel because the team are so strong, it's such a broken strategy. The hardest thing is making 85 plus games. It is much easier to release one. It just shouldn't be done as it was. Now, I don't know if I'd agree that the game would be hugely more successful because people do use the Epic Games launcher, which it did launch on. But I do believe it would be moderately more successful, but I think it would still be heavily reduced because of the fact that no one gives a shit about Ubisoft. Everyone hates Ubisoft as a company, and I believe there was some indication that Sweet Baby Inc. might have worked on this game. So I do believe that the sales still would have been heavily reduced, but I do think they would have been higher. Also, if there was the fact that the sales would be higher, I think when it was ported over to Steam, it would have received higher player count than it currently has. But like I said, it would have been better. And yes, it is absolutely an incorrect strategy to be working on 85 plus games with the same teams working on different games when it's much easier to release one. And here's the other thing that's much easier to do that Ubisoft needs to remember. It is a lot easier to keep your money than it is to spend it. He continues on, if the statements gamers should get used to not owning their games is true because of a specific release strategy, sub over sales, then the statement developers must get used to not having jobs if they make critically acclaimed game, platform strategy above title sales, is also true, and that just isn't sensible, even from a business perspective. Because the whole goal of the game industry should be to award studios who make good games, not award people who make mediocre or meh games that bring in a lot of money. The goal should be the art, not just the money. And while money should be a goal, the best way to make money should be to release good games, not just live service games, because there's only so much time in a day for live service models, and live service games will never give you the same level of fulfillment that a single player title will. There's also the other issue they're ignoring is a lot of more things in regards to Ubisoft's business model. If you remember back last year, Ubisoft has said they're closing all unused accounts, disabling access to purchase games. If your account wasn't used in a deemable period of time, then your entire account would be closed and all of your game access would be revoked from you, cutting you off from all games that you would have spent absolutely just stealing your money. So people don't trust Ubisoft. They don't trust to make an Ubisoft account, which you have to do to play most Ubisoft games, and they absolutely do not trust any launcher that isn't Steam, because Steam is so far the only launcher that respects your ownership of the games. Though of course that's not entirely true, as this article points out down here, that you really only own a license of them, which should be illegal. That should not be illegal. If you buy something, you should own it. But this author claims that Ubisoft has arguably seen the errors of its ways to some extent. After years of keeping PC releases to its own storefront and the Epic Games Store, Ubisoft's games began trickling back to Steam in 2022, when it announced a wholesale return to the storefront in September, saying that all future releases, including the delayed Assassin's Creed Shadows, will launch on Steam on day one. But I don't think Ubisoft has seen the error of its ways. I think they're just dealing with the fact that they have to do this right now to survive. I'm fully willing to bet the moment they get back on their feet, if they have the ability to, they will 1,000,000% go back to trying to use their own storefront. And that will, once again, fail. Unless somehow they prove to be more trustworthy and more reliable than Steam is, which Ubisoft will never be able to do. It also continues on down here that the fact that it didn't launch on Steam means that it can't resonate with an audience that doesn't reach because it isn't on a platform at the right moment, which is the major issue that a lot of Sony PlayStation games are having when they get ported to Steam, is they have no momentum once they move over. And that's partially because they're all bad games, but also because the momentum around the game has officially died down. The only one to break that record is the Spider-Man 1 game for PlayStation and Ghost of Tsushima. It continues on that you're removing 90% average of your potential audience by cutting out most PC gamers and cutting out the Steam Deck entirely, which is a major source of people who are going to be playing Metroidvanias. On my Steam Deck, despite having a 1TB storage drive, almost every single game on there is a Metroidvania of some sort, with a ton of Castlevania games, with Grime on there, Hollow Knight, and all of the LEGO games installed on the game. On the device. It's mostly Metroidvanias and other small games like this one would be, and I would 100% would play Prince of Persia, The Lost Crown on my Steam Deck. And of course, Douse isn't the only person to criticize them from Laryan, as the founder of Laryan, Sven Vinka, I hope I said that right, said that it's going to be a lot harder to get good content and subscription becomes the dominant model, because that will leave subscription service owners as the final arbiter of which games do and don't get made. That's maybe a debatable point, but the bottom line, Vinka said, is this: you won't find our game on a subscription service. And if you ask me, that's not a debatable point, that's 100% true. If you rely on subscriptions, people are not rewarding you with their money. They're just taking whatever slop you give them. Look at Netflix and their terrible shows, how there's no quality control, because it doesn't matter if the show makes money or not, because the service is what makes money, not the individual show. If we go to a subscription-based model, then people will be getting whatever the studio decides to make, instead of the studio having to beg players for their money. And as we're seeing, that's just not going to fly. That's not just working. And game studios better drop this subscription service model and opt for one that's much more substantive. So you know it's bad when other developers are calling out Ubisoft in a culture that's not really acceptance of people calling out other people currently if they're on the same side. This is effectively a developer-on-developer crime, which is generally not looked upon unless one of the developers is of the wrong mindset in regards to the culture. And because these people seem to be on relatively equal standing, it's kind of odd to see, but I'm glad that he's calling them out because somebody has to. We need to fix gaming, and the best way to do that is to call out those who are actively destroying it. Now, if only Laryan would go ahead and call out companies like Sweet Baby Inc., which is ultimately behind a lot of the degradation of the gaming community. Let me know down in the comments what you guys think about this, but that's all I've got for today, so I will see you guys on the next one.